I think the stigma of sex work is that we're, conditioned that we shouldn't talk about it, we shouldn't be open about it. And, having broken down that barrier and being unapologetic and just being like, well, this is my work and I'm not going to like shy away from that. I think having that kind of at the forefront of starting a relationship is just really important.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of On the Horizon, a podcast about what's on the horizon for sex workers and how to navigate it.
I'm Melrose Michaels, and you can find me at Melrose Michaels on social and melrosemichaels.com.
And I'm Lotus Lane, and you can find me on all social media at It's Lotus Lane, which is spelled ITSLOTUSLAIN. Also, just a reminder, if you're enjoying the podcast on Apple, to please leave us a 5-star review. That really helps us grow on the podcast and better share the information with our guests on the sex work community as a whole.
Who misses free and affordable ads without the anti-sex work rhetoric? Assembly 4 is a team of sex workers and technologists from Melbourne, Australia, aiming to bring back free and fair advertising to the sex work community. They also give back to organizations based in harm reduction, sex work, and education. Stepping away from the clunky design of traditional platforms, their platform, tris.link, is a refreshing and well-needed change in both presentation and mission. It's free to join and open to all. In the words of an A4 user, from the policies to the language to the advice and tips, it makes such a big difference to feel supported and encouraged instead of policed.
Welcome back to On the Horizon with myself, Lotus Lane, and Melrose Michaels. And today we have a very special guest, Jessa Jordan, who is here to talk with us and debunk the myth that sex workers and adult performers are undateable and unlovable. Let's get right into it. Jessa, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Howdy, it's your girl, Jessa Jordan. I am a model / performer / stripper / sugar baby / I've done every type of sex work there is at this point. I feel like, I don't even know. I'm so bad at introductions. I am based in Philadelphia, so I'm East Coast. And I've been in the sex industry at this point since 2012. So let's get into this idea that adult creators are not dateable. A lot of people will say that because, like, obviously, if we're popping pussy on the internet, what person would want to partner with someone like us? But I know from seeing your feed and just how open you are, Jessa, that you are dating and you are possibly loving being in love. I should hope so. I mean, I'm a non-monogamous human and have been for some time now. And so I actually met my current partner while I was already partnered with someone else.
Oh, nice.
And,
cool.
we met at a foot fetish party, actually, because he has a foot fetish.
Oh, cute.
And so, so it's very much like, all right, like, I'm working, but we're also going to be a little romantic, have a little flirty moment. And we keep debating what our actual origin story was as far as our relationship, because he tells it as he approached me, but I tell the story that I approached him. And I love that. I think because, since I was the one that was working, it was kind of like this weird moment of, you just see someone across the room and you're like, you look so out of place. Like, what is going on? Also, like, you're really cute. I want to talk to you. So I'm going to find out what's going on.
It was like that energy pool. It was just meant to be.
Yeah.
That's cute. I love when that happens.
Magnetic.
And it's been almost 5 years now. So it'll be 5 years in May.
Nice.
Interesting.
Well, early congratulations on that 5-year anniversary.
Bow, bow, bow. Thank you.
Yeah.
I feel like the origin story of how y'all met, like, because everyone has this idea that it's really hard to date adult creators or like mainstream porn stars, and that like we can't have normal, healthy relationships. But I think really, while maybe how we come together in sex work with our partners can be a little untraditional, I think a lot of the actual what happens behind the scenes in terms of relationship can be very traditional. Would you say that that's similar to your experience?
Definitely. especially because we met at, a foot fetish party. So that was extremely untraditional, very unconventional. And I don't know, in general, like, I think it can be really interesting because so much of how sex workers end up meeting partners is usually tied to work. You have a lot of on-set romances when you're shooting films, or if you are, in a strip club setting, like you might meet someone there and you end up exchanging contact information. So it definitely, at least in my life and in some of my friends' lives, it's usually been tied to work because we're workaholics. And if not, the most, I guess, unconventional aspect too is just like, sliding in someone's DMs as well. Like,
it's funny you mentioned that, because like even right now, I feel like sliding in DMs, I feel like that's becoming the new traditional way of like into relationships.
Yes, right? It used to be super weird. Like, how dare you? Who would date? Instagram's not for dating, but actually now it kind of is. I feel like I noticed people giving out Instagrams before phone numbers is like kind of like that first barrier sometimes.
Or Snapchat.
Especially like as a sex worker, I want to know how they're going to react to this whole persona before we even go there.
Yeah, that's real.
It's almost like a filter too, because it pre-qualifies anyone approaching. Like, this is what you're getting. This is what it is.
Very true. Very true.
Right. And you were mentioning earlier that you have other friends, adult creators that are in other relationships too. Like, how is that like navigating relationships? Like, do you guys discuss like the different issues that you have and things as far as like outside world kind of like judging or thinking like, how are you guys even together? How do you make this work? Like,
certainly. So it's so interesting because I feel like the friends that are in long-term relationships similar to mine, it's like they started their relationship prior to them becoming sex workers. And so I think that has a lot to do with the longevity of their relationships and why they've been able to thrive. But for people who are starting newer relationships, less than a year, less than 2 years, it's still that idea of, transparency and just being honest about it. Like, I think the stigma of sex work is that we're, conditioned that we shouldn't talk about it, we shouldn't be open about it. And, having broken down that barrier and being unapologetic and just being like, well, this is my work and I'm not going to like shy away from that. I think having that kind of at the forefront of starting a relationship is just really important.
I'm glad you said that because I definitely sensed a feeling, maybe like, especially in the beginning when we first started 2012, and maybe people that had experiences from before was like not maybe disclosing that you do sex work at first to people and then waiting some months. And I just thinking of doing things in that scenario feels disastrous to me because it's without the intention of, but it's very deceiving.
Yeah.
It's very deceptive. People need to know what they're getting up front. It would be the same way as us dating a civilian and we found out they didn't have a job or something and they're like going to work every day. You're like, okay. I think it puts those kind of interactions probably put a bad taste in people's mouths about dating sex workers because it makes us seem duplicitous in ways when we're just trying to protect ourselves because of all of the shame and stigma that exists out there.
Yeah.
I think there's actually a term for that. I think it was called honeypotting.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like you're
really?
intentionally being deceptive in order to like lure someone in.
Oh, cool. Interesting. I could see how that like plays honeypotting. I've never heard of that before. I mean, it's not a cool thing to do.
No, not at all. But it's understandable for sure.
Yeah.
There was when I had gotten into a relationship, or I was on a few dates with this person, and I like came up with this rule because I was back in the dating pool after being out of it for some time. And I was like, I'm just going to give it 3 dates. And on the third date, like, I'm going to lay out all my cards because this person was a little bit older than me, wasn't like on social media and things. But I'm like, if by the third date, like, he doesn't know this and either accept it or decline it, like, I'm just going to waste all my time. I'm wasting his time. Like, that was kind of the way I approached it. And it was actually interesting because I told him, and the way I said it was like, I just want to let you know that I have this thing that I don't know if you're going to be comfortable with. And this is like my work. And I explained it. And I was like, this is kind of like my catch. This is what I'm expecting you to view as like my catch, And then he had come out and told me that he was actually dealing with cancer. He was going through cancer. And so me opening up that like intimate like moment to be very brutally honest in a very early stage
allowed him to like put his cards on the table and be like, okay, well, I'm also going through this. So if you aren't going to be here for this, like we should probably, call it quits now. So like, I think that even sometimes good can come out of that like vulnerability in that moment where you're like, hey, this is what we see is what you get. Like, this is the whole thing. And I found that really interesting. It was a beautiful moment. Didn't last, but it was a beautiful moment.
Yeah, that is really good acceptance moment between both of you. I was wondering, Jessa, how do you think the interaction with your current partners, now that you're a sex worker, out and loud and proud, then compared to previous relationships you might have had before sex work, and how maybe communication issues differ there, just like how Melrose kind of in detailed, like how we're very vulnerable, allowed the other guy to be vulnerable. Like, do you notice communication differences from pre-sex work relationships to like now sex relationships?
I think in addition to the fact that I was doing sex work part-time, so like once I became like a full-time worker, I think that also changed my mentality of it. So in terms of that, there's like two different, I guess, pre-communication styles. But for earlier relationships, yeah, there definitely was, I think, more of a disconnect for me where I was like, oh, well, I can tell them that I'm going, to be doing XYZ things with my friends for the weekend, or I'm doing, it would be like, it depended mostly on the type of relationship with that person, whether it was just kind of like, more of a fling or a short-term relationship versus if I thought that was going to branch out into a longer relationship. But yeah, I definitely remember being a lot more hesitant, a lot more unlikely to, disclose what I was doing at certain times, just because I wasn't sure like how they would handle it or how it would fit into that relationship that I had with that person at that time. And now it's kind of like the first thing that I share about myself usually, but yeah.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. That's why I wanted to ask that question. It's interesting because I feel in a way, once you become a sex worker and you date and you have to disclose your catches, in order to be fully transparent, it just makes us be a little bit more transparent. I notice myself, I'm a lot more transparent than I was in previous dating where, yeah, depending on whether this is a fling or I think it's going to be long lasting, I might say different things in a different way or might kind of like mask certain feelings or, project certain behaviors that isn't, I think I'm a lot more authentic. I don't know if that's true for the two of you, but yeah, us being so judged, I just feel like, okay, judge away, make it happen. Either judge and accept or don't judge, or judge and move on, or don't judge and accept. But yeah.
I think too, it was just also being younger. Like I'm in my 30s now and I feel like being, a worker who started out at 19, it's just like, oh my God. Not being able to really find words sometimes to kind of explain like what this work is, or, at the time, even if I was going to be doing it long term, because like, well, what's there to talk about if this is a temporary position for me?
Right. Yeah. Because when you're starting, you don't know that you're going to be here 10 years later, and then thinking 10 years beyond that. So yeah.
That's a good point.
I hear you.
There's
interesting.
Also like, I love that you brought up age, because the way I approach and talk about my work when I started 11 years ago, the way I talked about it then and approached it back then was so different than the way I do now. Like something about being in your 30s is just like, I don't care anymore. Like, just do what you want.
Yeah, that
part. It's like, child, it's all out there. And at this point, I have such a large social media footprint that I feel like even if someone just Googled my nickname, I feel like it would still come up because obviously Jessa's not my real name. But like, it would just, all this information about me would pop up and, scenes that I've done, photo shoots that I've done. So like someone would easily be able to, and have actually, I've had some very interesting conversations with partners' parents because they've Googled. So it's like, oh dear.
How has that been like?
Ooh, child.
Yeah, what was brought up and how did you handle that?
So I've also done a good bit of advocacy around abortion rights.
Okay.
Fuck the SCOTUS. And so literally I've had, articles where I've written things and shared my opinions, and just those were the ones that ended up circulating with a very conservative family member. And it became like a very awkward, just because I'd been seeing this person for so long already, like I was already indoctrinated into their family and everyone loved me, but they were just like, oh, this kind of is an interesting little, new fact about you.
Yeah.
And I remember just specifically when it came up, it was in the context of someone else's family member having a difficult time with, their decision around their pregnancy. And I, just kind of blurted something out and they were just like, oh, and I was like, yeah, I've actually written articles about this. And, there's books and there's all these different pieces of media surrounding, how they can best make their decisions. So, here's several links and several things. And so I kind of ratted on myself in that way. But, we had we had the conversation and I was like, look, like, I know you guys are super conservative and, that's your position and that's fine. As long as you respect that I do not agree with you, I don't think we'll have any issues. And this really doesn't have to come up every time we see each other. Like, it's really just, I hope this helps the person that it needs to. And yeah, we'll just let it be that. But yeah, that's the wonderful thing about maturity. It's just being able to respectfully disagree with someone.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad they were mature enough to accept the respectful disagreement as well.
Yeah.
Especially because it was your partner's family, not your own. So that can be interesting.
Do you ever find that people project their expectations for like an adult creator or like a porn star's relationships onto you? Like, do you feel that they come into like your space with this preconceived notion of what your relationship is like?
To a degree. Yeah, I think especially in the sense of like fans and like supporters and things like that, like they definitely have made comments where I'm like, now why would you think that about this relationship that's just developing pretty much before your eyes? But I think it's just because there's so much projection just in general based off of like, any type of media personality, like because people don't actually know you. They have these, what are they called? Parasocial relationships where they're just filling in the gaps of what they think about you based off things that you post. And it's not wrong, but it is just like very strange sometimes, especially when they share those details with you, because you're like, that couldn't be further from the truth, but like, how would you know that? Right? Like, you're not like hiding in my trash can, like learning all this stuff about me.
Yeah.
So
like, what do you think some of the projections have been about you specifically that fans or outsiders have made assumptions thinking about you and the type of relationship they would think you would have or whatnot?
I think because I've actually said in other interviews that I am in mostly like female-led relationships, so they think that I'm like super dommy and like very aggressive, and that's not necessarily. I was like, I think this is getting into fantasy land now where it's like you want that to be the case.
Yeah.
But
that makes sense. I've had that happen too when I'm talking about like my bisexual relationships or like I've made, content with ex-girlfriends and I'm like, oh, you must be like this and like this. I'm like, and then, no, or also just the general, like, it must be so much fun to sleep with you. I'm like, most nights I'm really boring.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. Like, because they always see us in like lingerie and things and like highly made up, they just think that we're like in that mode 24/7. And it's like, the other one is that too, we're like super like overtly sexual, where it's like, no, it's a pretty normal sex drive. I feel like it's not, I mean, I can't speak for you guys, but like my libido is not like super high, whereas like I think I get that projection a lot. And I mean, we could go on forever about, the racial implications, but it's like, I'm not like horny 24/7. Like that's just not.
I would like to pretend, but yeah, I know. Being horny 24/7, you're eventually going to be tired of being horny.
Yeah.
But yeah, I totally get what you're saying with fans, with the type of performances that you do, or sometimes because I've done dom stuff or I've done strap-on work, they think that that's going to be the type of person I am in a relationship when, I mean, it's a very fun role to act out, don't get me wrong, but yeah, for love and relationship and intimacy, it's a different person. That's the image of Lotus. This is the reality of Lotus over here.
Absolutely.
Do you, in your circle, like friend circle, in terms of like work friend circle, do you feel like a fair amount of other people you've worked with or come in contact in the industry are also in stable, happy relationships? Or at least when they're dating someone, that they're fairly normal compared to like civilian relationships?
The overwhelming amount. Yeah. I mean, of course, there's always that one chaotic friend who their relationships are just like constantly on fire. But most of my friends, because I think we're all a little older, I don't think I have any friends who are younger than 25 at this point. And so I think they not only like found that grounding in themselves, but also like what they want realistically out of partners and dynamics, and just figuring out like where everything fits in the long-term aspects of their lives.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm like trying to think like, or, you know, the converse is that there are just like perpetual singles who don't actually want to be in relationships. And it's not because of work necessarily so much as they are just doing that internal work on themselves and just want a little bit more time to really get to know themselves.
I love that. That's so true. I feel like so much of the conversations are around sex work. If people just would view us as people first versus sex workers, they would understand that the numbers, the way things work is pretty much the same. We just have a different line of work. And like, like for myself, speaking for myself, I've been with my husband 7 years dating, and I don't even know, 4 years married, something like that. But
congrats.
No, thank you. Time flew. We talked about that the other day. I'm like, it's been a fucking long time. I had no idea. But our friends will like come up to him like, it must be so cool dating a porn star. And I don't consider that term, like, does not belong to me. I don't consider myself anything close to that. But he's like, it's actually just like dating every other girl I've dated, except she wears lingerie for everyone but me.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love it.
That's so true. It's so true.
Yeah, I honestly feel like when I'm hearing us talk about relationships and how we've dealt with them, a lot of the things that people think are the reasons why we're not dateable, like us being in porn, being intimate, whatever, online and bearing ourselves, is actually what's made us better at relationships than maybe we might have been before, because we are comfortable having direct conversations. We know how to communicate, whether it's been when we're discussing a shoot with someone or a collaboration and what we're going to work on. I mean, I think like definitely my communication skills have leveled up 100% since being in the adult industry all of this time. So the things that people want to use against us and say, oh, these are reasons why they're undateable, are actually like enhancements. Like, we know how to communicate. We know how to be in touch with our sensuality. We know how to hold space for others when they're trying to explore their sexuality. I mean, what could be better than dating someone like that?
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's funny because I think that's something my husband has mentioned to me countless times, is how much his communication has improved from dating me, because I'm very thorough. Like I will beat the horse where I'm like, let's talk about this. Why do you feel this way? How did you get from A to B? Why are we here now? Is this really significant? Like, I will go in on things. And he's like, I didn't know how to talk before you. And I feel like that is definitely a credit to sex work, because you're discussing boundaries and feelings and was this good for you and all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have, like, I've talked to regular, like, civilian friends about that, where I'm like, have you ever gone over, like, first off, consent? Like, do you ask for consent? And that question is usually like, no, like, we can tell if we're consenting. Like, you can't. You don't know that. Like, you have to say it. And then also like boundaries, like, do you ask them if you can do this or that? And like, no, that seems odd. I'm like, actually, it can be really sexy. Like, you're doing it wrong. But I think that communication, and especially sexually, it leads to better sexual experiences in your relationships, because you have that skill set that I don't find a lot of my couple friends who are outside of sex work necessarily have developed.
Right. Yeah.
I fully agree.
And I mean, for listeners out there that may be like wondering, what is typical relationship life like for sex workers? Like, is it like we're going to sex parties all the time and bringing in like thirds and fourths? I mean, maybe if we're poly, but you know, what, in your opinion, Jessa, is like your day-to-day with your partner, your long-term?
What
is...
Now that it's summer, I feel like it's a lot more like outdoorsy, adventure-y stuff. So we like go kayaking, beach trips, you know, things like that. Just trying to be outside in the sun as much as possible. Pool trips, and so yeah, it's literally just I like our dynamic because we give each other so much space. Like, he's really big on video games and I like to read books. And so literally there's just moments where he's playing video games in the living room and I'm just like in bed reading. Yeah, there's just like a lot of like us playing with the cat and just like, being goofy, telling like weird jokes. We have like I feel like all relationships, you have your own little language that
yes.
You've developed over the amount of time that you've been together. And so that there's a lot of that where it's like, if someone put a mic in our house, they'd be like, what gibberish is this? Like, what is going on? Like, are they okay? Like,
I love it.
Is there a gas leak? Like, what's happening? So yeah, just a lot of that. Like, I think our relationship has a lot of like really strong elements of just allowing us to be playful and like fun with each other. And that leads into ease with the serious stuff. So.
Oh, I love that. I could relate to that. My husband's literally kayaking right now. So it was like, that's so funny he said that.
Kayaking is coming up a lot. I was listening to a podcast earlier getting ready and they were talking about kayaking out of the blue in there. So this is like a morning of kayaking.
It's fun. Oh my God. And it's such a workout. Like, I didn't think that it was. Yeah, the river might beat you up. So just be prepared for that.
So because you are a sex worker, do you ever plan like work trips alongside with your leisure and relationship trips, or is it like you're doing a relationship fun leisure trip and then you decide to work some little work elements in there too? Like, how do you balance that out?
At this point, just because of my partner's schedule, we don't end up performing as much together anymore. And so for me, it's been like work trips, separate of leisure vacations because he just wants to be on vacation. He's not really interested in working while he, isn't, because his primary work is, completely separate of sex work. And so, yeah, it's definitely like when we were first dating, it was a lot of like work on top of leisure. Just, I think like our first 3 trips together, like we, were definitely like shooting scenes and he was like photographing me and like other people or, being videographer for me and other people. So yeah, it was a lot of, like come on this trip with me, but also here's a camera.
Yeah.
I find that's my husband's like natural state these days. Like, hold this.
He knows what he's here for.
This is good. You really highlighted the normalcy of like a sex working relationship, even with a non-traditional origin story, which is like we said in the beginning. I find that that's true for a lot of us. But at the end of the day, we're just in our, relationships being weird and saying goofy things no one would understand. And like in my household, I'm like, me and my husband always spell words in front of our pets like they can read. Like when people visit, they're just like, we know what you're spelling. It's like those things get away from you because it's just a normal relationship. That's kind of what happens and how it goes. And I think that for anyone listening, I hope that that's kind of what they take away.
Yeah. And even going back to what you were saying, he knows what he's here for. It's a lot less, big spoon, a lot more big tripod.
Yeah.
I love that. Hell yeah.
That's perfect.
That's what we need as sex workers. We need a big tripod, not necessarily big.
Yeah.
Because then you're in the camera with us and we can't have that right now.
That's awesome.
Oh, real quick. One of the questions just popped up in my head is, had you ever had to deal with jealousy in your relationships? Like within your work interactions, was there ever a sense of like, I feel like you're a little too close with this work partner? Or can you explain the dynamic so I know just how close you guys are, or any kind of like instances like that?
Thankfully, in this current relationship, this person doesn't really have a jealous bone in his body, which I know trite as that sounds, but definitely in earlier relationships, one of my first relationships where I was just dancing and nude modeling, and that person was like constantly freaking out, just being like, well, if you're doing this for all these random people on the internet, like, what are you doing outside of work or like with other people and this, that, and the third, or like, like, and it was so strange because that was like a situationship in every like semblance of the word, because he didn't actually want to claim our relationship. Like, oh God, such a strange human.
Yeah.
And then I definitely had like to actually end relationships a couple of times just because people didn't really understand, the dynamic of well, me and my friends like get naked and take pictures of each other, and that's our work. Like it's not.
Right.
There's nothing nefarious going on. Like we're just like we're hanging out. Sometimes we take our boobs out. Sometimes we don't. And sometimes there's a video that ends up on the internet. Like
yeah,
it's not really more than that. Like even transitioning into getting into more like explicit like hardcore work. It's like, okay, yeah, like sometimes I will have sex with my friends, but literally it's once the camera stops rolling, like that's not our dynamic anymore. Like that was literally just work, and we're completely like compartmentalizing our relationship.
Yeah.
So, and I think like people can't like disconnect themselves or like divorce their sexual, romantic, emotional selves from, relationships in that way. Like it's really hard for civilians sometimes.
And yeah, that idea that sex can just be sex and doesn't need to be like love or like romance.
Like a feeling attached of attachment to this person now.
Or ownership, for sure.
That's really good that you brought that up, because I think some people think, especially when it becomes friends and we're girls and we're making videos together, and then they say, oh, we're going to the mall. And they're like, oh, you're going to the mall. No, we rarely are going to the motherfucking mall. Like, it's not always sex and orgies and parties just because you've seen one video like that.
Right.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. And you're not dealing with those kinds of situations anymore either. So that's really good.
I wouldn't even know how to respond to someone. I'd be like, okay, well, like, I guess we're done here.
Like it's just like there's not even a point in arguing anymore with someone that has a mentality like that. At this point, I say, oh, those are the unhealed. Yeah. They're unhealed. They're still working through it, and I'll let them work through it on their own.
Well, for you, Jessa, where can people find you on social and all your contents? Like, plug all of the things.
Yes, so everything is available at Miss Jessa Jordan on all the socials, or you can check out MissJessaJordan.com, and that will link you to everything behind a paywall. So
love it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you guys so much for having me. This was so fun.
This segment of today's episode is sponsored by Sex.com, one of the absolute best content creator platforms out there. It looks better than any other, has a higher level of security than any other, and boasts over 3 million unique visitors a day scrolling through viral looped adult short-form videos. Sex.com is like, well, sex itself. A lot of people do it. Some just do it much, much better than the others. Sex.com. If you're gonna do it right.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of On the Horizon, a podcast about what's on the horizon for sex workers and how to navigate it.
I'm Melrose Michaels, and you can find me at Melrose Michaels on social and melrosemichaels.com.
And I'm Lotus Lane, and you can find me on all social media at It's Lotus Lane, which is spelled ITSLOTUSLAIN.